Loss of control in flight continues to be the number one cause of fatal accidents across all sectors of aviation. But is it truly a cause, or is it an outcome in response to other factors, such as decision-making, fatigue, automation mismanagement? We're going to talk about all that today. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce Sonny Bates, the CEO at Wyvern. Wyvern is the global leader in elevating safety and security in aviation, where Wyvern has established the highest standard in aviation safety and risk management. Let me talk a little bit about Sonny before he comes in here to take over the presentation this morning. Sonny started his career in the U.S. Air Force, where he was an instructor pilot, flight examiner, flight commander, aircraft maintenance quality assurance evaluator, C-5 Galaxy aircraft commander, Boeing C-17 safety program manager, and director of operations for the largest air freight operation in the United States Department of Defense. He has vast business experience as well. He's been a chief pilot, safety manager, and captain on various types of business jet aircraft. Sonny served as the program director for the International Business Aviation Council, or IBAC, overseeing the international standards program for 700 operators worldwide. His credentials and degrees include FAA Airline Transport Pilot, Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, Master of Science in Management, Master of Philosophy in Management. He's also an MBAA Certified Aviation Manager, Certified International Safety Manager, and IBAC Accredited Auditor. Sonny is a great guy, and we've really become close friends over the past few years, working together really to elevate safety across the industry. And I'm just really excited to hand this over to Sonny. Sonny, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you for that introduction, BJ. I really appreciate it. This presentation is about loss of control in flight and conducting an analysis of that event with Bow-Tie, and also ways we can move forward more smartly together to not only prevent upset and recovery situations, but how APS and Wyvern are working together for pilot qualification and requirements. So this is an event that was inspired by true events. It happened to involve a Hawker 850 with a crew that's based in the New England area. The flight was planned for out of the Greater Cincinnati Airport, CBG, to San Francisco. The pilot in command was a retired ex-airline pilot with about 18,000 hours of flying experience, very experienced pilot with some military background as well. He was on the job for 1 year at this Part 91 operator, so it was basically a husband and wife owning an aircraft, and this was like a perfect retirement job for this pilot in command. The other pilot was on the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, at least in business aviation terms, about 2,000 hours total time, a fairly new ATP-rated pilot. Again, also 1 year on the job with this Part 91 operator. It happened to be a new airplane acquired by this husband and wife, and they were enjoying flying private versus the commercial airline system. There were no cabin crew, and on this flight, there were 4 passengers. So what happened was, after takeoff during the en route climb, air traffic control asked for the best climb to get the Hawker over conflicting traffic. So the crew accepted that challenge from ATC. They could have said negative and just remained at their altitude. But as flight crew often do, they accept the challenge from ATC and accept some risk. And so they did that The pilot he set the lowest climb Mach possible for this aircraft and then selected flight level change, and the aircraft pitched up to catch that airspeed target. Shortly after that, the aircraft hit the jet stream, and it was like a direct hit on, probably you couldn't get any more direct. And so then the airplane pitched up more and a bit aggressively to maintain the Mach number. Shortly thereafter, the stick shaker activated and the autopilot disengaged, and the aircraft rolled to the left and pitched down and began descending. The ATC at this time is wondering what they're doing and telling them to climb because of the opposing traffic. Anyway, all that tension, maybe that stress, led to the pilot in command overcorrecting, aggravating the situation. Then the air traffic control told the Hawker to climb immediately due to conflicting traffic, and then they responded they were unable and they were recovering from what they called a wake turbulence event. And then so the pilot in command eventually pulled back after aggravating the situation, but was able to recover. So it was a very ungraceful recovery, to say the least. And in the end, no one got hurt. The passengers were terrified, and the pilots were embarrassed and wondering what happened. And they chalked it up as a close call. They had a SMS, safety management system, but there were no input into the SMS, and then subsequently no real analysis of what really happened and why it happened. And it wasn't until this team contacted me and was interested if I'd ever heard of anything like this, which I had not, that we actually conducted an analysis to see, what were the contributing factors and how this could be prevented in the future. So as part of the analysis, there's many ways you can analyze an event. You can do root cause analysis, asking 5 whys, HFACS analysis, human factors analysis, where you're using the James Reason Swiss cheese. All of these are really good techniques. I offer this bow tie analysis just as a way, it's kind of a macro view of prevention controls and recovery preparedness with regard to an upset event. So looking at the common threats and prevention controls for an upset situation in flight, when we look to the far left, this list indicates or represents common threats that could lead to an upset event. These include, as you can see, environmental, to include turbulence, even clear air turbulence, mountain wave, wind shear, thunderstorms. And this is not an exhaustive list or an all-inclusive list. As you can see, the jet stream is not in there. However, that could be inferred when you look at wind shear. Systems anomalies, flight instruments, autopilot systems. In this case, even though the autopilot had not apparently failed, it was working properly. It did seem like through analysis and conversation with these pilots in analysis that their understanding of the flight level change mode and the risks they were taking by going to the minimum en route speed at that altitude in an aggressive climb, they just didn't really have a really good understanding of the potential there for what could happen, which actually was what did happen. And then we have our pilot-induced threats, improper cross-check, inappropriate pilot technique, distraction, inattention, and so forth. And the last one there, automation, mismanagement, where there's all kinds of techniques. Various pilots would say, well, in that case, I would select this mode on the flight annunciator panel, or not annunciator panel, but the flight control panel, and or other pilots would use different techniques. But there are some techniques that are more appropriate than others with regard to like an en route climb. So you have these threats on the left. In the middle, in between the upset and the threats are your controls. And I put at the very top there, UPRT, upset prevention recovery training, is probably the most obvious and direct control measure for preventing an upset situation. During that kind of training, the pilots are going to be reminded and talk about and learn and ingrain in their psyche really the things that could lead to an upset event, and then make sure that they develop habit patterns to prevent these things from occurring in their normal operations. But then the other common controls include automation, policy procedures, really effective CRM training, and so forth. The last one there cannot be understated either, or under-expressed, however you want to say that, and that's manual flying policy. Today, we need to make sure that our pilots are actually flying the airplane, hand flying the airplane enough to feel confident that should they ever get into an upset situation, that they can, skillfully fly out of that situation. So this is the left side of the bow tie equation. It's just an example. It's, like I said, it's not exhaustive. Therefore, mostly for training purposes. But again, threats are being blocked, like the James Reason Swiss cheese, with controls to prevent the upset event. But in this case, the upset event did happen. So then we look at the right side of the equation, on the other side of the bow tie. What's the consequence analysis? And then again, because this is not a completely exhaustive list, mostly for training purposes, there are at least three possible outcomes: a safe recovery, which is what you're looking for and planning for, as long as you have effective upset prevention and recovery training. Another pathway, if you will, is you experience a loss that day. Then do you have adequate insurance to cover the following events post loss? And then another pathway is, well, you had the event, whether you recovered safely or not. How are you going to manage that with an emergency response plan, if that's the case? Or let's say the airplane crashed, but they're survivors. Or even in your SMS, let's say you have a safe recovery, but did you enter this into your SMS and was it analyzed appropriately? So these are the different consequence pathways. There could be more, but for training purposes here, these are at least three. Again, with the most desirable one at the top, safe recovery via effective UPRT. So the situation that I just presented to you, which was a real life situation, was really a condition that's evolving in our industry and has been over the last few years. And that is, there's a demand for pilots. We all know that. And there's this opportunity for retired airline pilots to go into business aviation, especially Part 91 and Part 135 operations. There's also an opportunity to pair these pilots up, the retired airline, highly experienced pilots, with low experience second commands who are looking for opportunity. So even though this is a great potential for a solution together, these kind of staffing, which are different than our typical business aviation pairings, if you will, over the past, let's say 20 to 30 years or more, because there's such a differential there with pilot experience. This pilot in command and this second in command combination is going to require some excellent leadership and management skills, and just really good human skills, what we call essential skills, so that they work well together and they're able to learn from each other and minimize and manage conflict on the flight deck, and make CRM as effective as it possibly can be. So one of the things that I want to make the audience aware of is that as Wyvern and APS work together to make a better future, so that all pilots bring everybody home safely, we look at, there's legal requirements out in the system, and then there's the Wyvern requirements and APS requirements for pilot qualification and training. And I offer this slide to show you that the legal requirements are well below what Wyvern registered and Wyvern wingman standards require for pilots. A registered standard ensures that pilots, both pilot in command and second in command, have a much higher qualification and currency level than the federal regulations. And the wingman standard is even higher than registered. It's the most stringent. But we've worked together with APS over the past at least 2 years or more to make these standards more meaningful, flexible, so that when you have this opportunity to pair maybe really highly experienced pilots with lower experienced pilots, the UPRT training can make these standards more beneficial and flexible. And I'll show you an example here. So here's the Wyvern registered standard. And without looking at all the numbers there and getting confused, I just want to highlight this, the one there, that's the total time and airplane type. Now, the registered standard for Wyvern says that the pilot in command has to have 200 hours in type, or they will not pass the report card that's run on that flight. We call that the PASS report, the Pilot and Aircraft Safety Survey, PASS. So if a pilot does not have at least 200 hours in type, the pilot in command will not pass, and therefore why it's not a Wyvern approved flight for a registered flight. Now, we can go down to 100 hours in PIC in this airplane in that type. And we can even lower it to 50 hours of PIC time if that pilot in command has UPRT training that's from a certified organization like APS. So there's one way there that Wyvern and APS have worked together to make one of the requirements for the pilot in command, in this case, more flexible. And showing you the wingman standard, which is much more stringent. We have requirements highlighted for both the pilot in command and second in command, where if you can see here that 3,500 hours, for example, is required for total time in aircraft for a pilot in command. That number can be reduced to 3,000 hours total time if, again, the pilot in command has had proper UPRT training from a certified company like APS. And then the second command requirement is 1,250 hours, which can be reduced 1,000. And then the total time in class, 500 hours, which can be reduced down to 300 hours, all if these pilots have UPRT training in the past 24 months with a certified company like APS. So, in summary, I just wanted to share with you today that loss control in flight is real. This threat is real. And I just wanted to provide a real life example that was shared with me, and we actually analyzed it together, myself and that pilot team, to see what happened. How did they get there? Why was the recovery not so excellent? And during that analysis and conversation with them, we realized that they had some training issues. They had not ever went to UPRT training of any kind, and that was an opportunity. And so they made a commitment to do that. There was also staffing issues where the senior pilot really was not used to flying with a younger pilot. He even admitted he felt a little uncomfortable being a training pilot because he just wasn't used to being like an instructor. But that was like self-pressure. He was putting that pressure on himself. Had he just been a normal pilot and just being open and honest and willing to share experiences and learn from the younger pilot, then that kind of dynamic between these two pilots would have been improved. So this is where it comes back to the leadership is required to kind of set the tone, the professional tone of what's expected from these pilot crews with these very disparate experience dimensions that they bring to the flight deck. But yet there's no problem as long as they agree to work together and learn together, again, very professionally. There's also some cultural issues. And when I say cultural in this domain, it was really about, age differences in their perceptions. So anyway, I shared with you the bow tie analysis and expressed how UPRT is the primary way to prevent loss control in flight, or one way, a primary way. And then the UPRT can ensure a safe recovery. And lastly, share with you the Wyvern standards that allow flexibility. Excuse me. So that's it. I'm going to turn it back over to you, BJ, and I'm losing my voice.
Well, great job there, Sonny. Well done. And I think I cut you off a little bit quick there just because you're starting to pound your chest a little bit. So great presentation. Maybe before we comment about it, I did notice that we have a great turnout, especially international turnout. We have big turnout here from North America, but also we have in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, India. So really exciting to see that. So Sunny, tell me a little bit about your the experience you had when you're meeting with different folks when you're doing audits, and maybe how you focus on the human factor side of it. I think you hinted a little bit of that today, but is human factors a big part of what you look for as an auditor, especially when you're looking into the culture? Would you mind commenting on that just for a few minutes?
Yeah, certainly, BJ. And again, thanks for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. And I am very, very pleased to hear that our colleagues around the world are tuning in. And that's a beautiful thing. Since over 10 years, I've been traveling around the world with this document called 9859 from ICAO, which gives us this common language to talk about managing safety risk in a common way. And it's all connected to Annex 19. But then that just opens the door to the ICAO document library. And BG, I know you and your team have helped to create other ICAO documents that are highly focused on upset prevention and recovery training. So I encourage all of us to continue to do that, read the international standards with regard to all these risks that we're responsible to manage as professionals. So to address your question there, I appreciate that. Yes, well, when we go on site and visit with, and I try to use the term audit kind of sparingly because the way we audit at Wyvern is I think really unique and a bit different than how other companies might do it. We hyper focus on human factors, human performance, and those organizational factors that can influence that performance. And so when we do that, let's say, for example, when we're looking at loss of control in flight or the risk related to that, you know, we go into an organization and first assess their general culture with regard to safety. And then we look at their system. And when I say their system, their people, their staff, how their staff interact with each other and complement each other or otherwise, and how that staff work together, management team, line personnel, and middle management to make key decisions that are related to safety. And of course, these are related to also human factors like fatigue and distraction and complacency and things like that. But when we look at like loss of control in flight, the decision making that happens prior to that event it might seem far removed, but it's really not. It could be that you have a manager that's really hyper involved in every day and everybody's decision, and it works for them. But that might not be a healthy environment really, because the people are not empowered to make decisions when they need to make them and how they need to make them. And so we look through different lenses at the organization to see where they have vulnerabilities. And again, they might be operating in an excellent way more than 85 or 90% of the time, if you had the data, let's say. But the way they're structured, you can see the vulnerabilities right away. The resiliency and potential failure is there if they have a single point failure with one manager that's really micromanaging everything, even though they're really astute. But that's just one example. So we look at these different lenses to see how these decisions during flight planning and trip setup could increase pressure, could increase risk, and could increase stress. How well do they manage distraction? You know, with this example I gave you today, you know, you can imagine a crew on an en route climb in today's environment. What are the pilots doing? They might be on their iPads. They're on autopilot. Everything's cool. ATC asks this. Oh yeah, we can do that. Boom. They go back down, heads down on their iPads or whatever. So there's a lot of potential for distraction. And so we're asking management, how do you manage that distraction on the flight deck? What do you allow your pilots to do? What do you not allow them to do? And some organizations are really tough on that. They're like, no distraction whatsoever. And that's any kind. And then other companies like, it's okay, we're really liberal with that. We want the pilots to be engaged. So we don't care if they're playing Angry Birds, you know? So there's a real difference in the way management views distraction management. So I could go on forever on this one, BJ, and I won't do that to you. But
No worries. That's great. No, I think that's so important with, when I went from the military, like you were, Sonny, and then I went into the airlines. I think I was blessed to be with an airline that had very robust SOPs in the flight deck, where it was very disciplined, and they really, they really abided by the sterile cockpit rules, especially in certain areas of flight operation. And so it was really rewarding to see that, having not had any civilian experience really prior to that. It was really a wonderful thing to see showing up as to how critically they considered the human factor side of it, the CRM side of it, the SOP side of it, and that really drove the discipline of really working together very effectively. And I know I flew with several hundred different captains, very rarely flew with the same one, and yet everything was so standardized, it just felt like you're at home on every flight, which was really nice. So, to your point, human factors can certainly be mitigated by the standard operating procedures or expectations of the operator, in this case, an airline.
yeah. I just thought of something. Just hearing you say that. So as I was indicating, when we go evaluate a company, we'll look at them through safety culture lens, human factors, human performance lens, organizational factors lens, and then finally we ask like 11 basic questions with regard to specific risk. One of them being loss of control in flight. And I'm just thinking out loud here right now. We ask each person in the organization how they feel like the risk related to loss of control in flights being managed, and that usually stirs up conversations about training, like UPRT training. Right. But as the bow tie example I provided there displays, there are many things that could lead up to a serious upset, undesired state in flight. And I think there's an opportunity to explore that conversation a little bit more. Again, like the proper use of the autopilot, CRM, and things like that, or distraction, way to manage that. So there may be ways to look at your current, and I'm talking to the visitors here mainly. When you look at your recurrent training for human performance and human factors, usually operators have it once every 24 months as a minimum. All your people are training human factors. Don't check that box. Don't say, "Oh yeah, we watched a video, we got it nailed." Really explore that box, and the reason why Wyvern is so committed to look at and evaluate operators the way we do is 70 to 80% of all accidents and serious incidents around the world identify human performance as contributing or causal. So this is the area that we should be all hyper focused on. Safety is behavior driven. Once you get to the point where you have a system set up, where your manuals are excellent, your training programs you think might be excellent, and your staffing levels are excellent, so you're taking care of the structure the best you can. We really need to dig in together as colleagues in this industry and understand the things that really affect our performance. And then those things will get us into that undesired state if we don't manage those up front. And so look at the way you do human performance training, and let's have that conversation.
I love it, Sonny. Great. Well said. I'm going to bring in one question we have here, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to comment on it initially. We do have this question. It says, is UPRT widely followed across the aviation industry? And I think it brings up a very interesting part of the conversation. You mentioned when you ask an operator, are you mitigating your risk of loss of control in flight? Well, there really has been a fundamental shift in the industry starting in 2014 with the ICAO manual on upset prevention and recovery training that you alluded to. It's ICAO Doc 111, 10011. And the unfortunate part is that upset prevention and recovery training, formerly called stall recovery unusual attitude training, in many instances in the United States and around the world just got relabeled as UPRT, and they largely just continued doing what they were doing before. And I think what the industry and operators have a hard time understanding is the reason why loss of control in flight is accountable to nearly 50% of fatalities in aviation is an actual product of that very training that's been done classically in UPRT. So the new guidance issued by ICAO is really a complete shift to approach it from an awareness, prevention, and recovery standpoint. So as you were talking about on the bow tie method, is that resource that was put together by 40 organization, 80 experts over 5 years focuses both before and after the upset, with the large focus on the prevention side of it, with awareness, with decision making, and manual flying proficiency, and really addressing it from that standpoint. So I guess to the question, is UPRT widely followed across the aviation industry? I would say, well, that really depends on what you mean by UPRT. If you mean what we've been doing before under a new name called UPRT, I would say yes. For the new approach to UPRT, upset prevention recovery training, I know that the Part 121 air carriers in the United States are addressing it with robust changes to how they approach it. I mean, we're partnered with United and Delta Airlines and put together their program and all their Boeing and Airbus fleet types. And that is really a transformational experience for pilots going through that, because it's not at all the same. It's a completely different approach where you're working together as a crew, where you're mitigating the risks, you're taking early preventative action. And the point is that with the FOQA data and the ASAP data with these air carriers, they're seeing double-digit reductions in the precursor events leading to loss of control, simply because of implementing UPRT the correct way. So the good news, and I'll wrap it up with this, is the good news is when ICAO put that guidance out in 2014, there's a period of time by which the rest of the industry worldwide, if they want to stay in compliance with ICAO flight operational practices, need to integrate upset prevention and recovery training. The unfortunate part about it is you can get away with essentially taking what you did before and calling it UPRT. It really is going to require progressive airlines, progressive flight departments, progressive operators to say, this is really unnecessary loss of life. This is unnecessary risk that can be largely mitigated by training. So with that, Sonny, anything you want to add to that particular topic on the widely followed question we just had?
Yeah, just the awareness and prevention part of that equation, along with recovery. So the awareness and prevention is a big part of that training, as you indicated already, BJ. And so that's what I'm, asking our colleagues and friends around the world. When you look at your human factors training, you can add another module altogether and just call it LOC-I training. I mean, it's okay to do that. You empower yourself, take charge of your training. And as BJ said, this is a real risk. That's why we're spending time talking about it. It's not, we don't do this because it's like, it's a business. We actually get up every day and say, we want to prevent these incidents from happening. That's what we're called to do in life. And so if you want to empower yourself, and I implore you to do that, do human factors training that's focused on preventing something. Don't just keep doing human factors training to check the box. Oh yeah, we know the CRM thing really well. We talk about it once a year or every 2 years. No, focus on a risk like loss control in flight and say, how is our CRM preventing that from happening? How is our other human factors training preventing that risk from happening? And focus on that. Since it's such a killer in the industry, we have to do something specific about it. This devil called LOC-I.
Absolutely. No, very, very well said. I appreciate your insights on that, Sonny. So I have one that's kind of related to essentially the scenario that you presented a little bit earlier by Christopher here. I'm just going to read it to you so you have a chance to think about it, Sonny. It says, was there a purposeful decision to not report this by the crew, or did they have an SMS but didn't use it regularly, had insufficient training on it, ignored it, etc., and was it not part of the safety culture of the department? So that's a great question for you, Sonny. Over to you. That's a softball, I think. Go. Just
it's a loaded one too. It's got so much in there. So let's kind of analyze that. It's a great question, by the way. I love it. Here's the reason why I love it. In business aviation, we focus quite a bit on business aviation, rightfully so. BJ was already explaining how the military and the airline system really has the resources to commit to making sure that we're addressing this risk. But in business aviation, most of the operators are one airplane, two pilot operations. So even though they might have an SMS, the SMS, and a lot of times is kind of like, well, what do I put in this thing? Because it's just the two of us. We know what's going on. We talk about it every day. So SMS becomes kind of like this compliance box that's checked. Without realizing that SMS is a tool you can use to help you analyze things if it's designed properly. And what I mean by designed properly you need to have an incident investigation technique or procedure in your SMS. This crew did not have that. And so they needed to implement that into their SMS. And so they had a very rudimentary SMS to check the box. And so they were happy making like 3-4 reports a year. So when they got their audit and they got their certificate on the wall, they could say, hey, our system is working. And it was just an on-the-shelf system. Even though they showed input into it and they're doing a frat every day or every day that they flew, this was all just in motion. It was like sleepwalking, right? And so an effective SMS has an incident investigation checklist. And this is a weak area I see with many operators. They have an emergency response plan for the super bad event that we pray never happens. And then we have the frat for the everyday event that happens every day. And it's always, okay, we're good. We're below 30. Nobody cares. Boom, they go fly. But we don't have an incident investigation checklist. And guess what? An incident is anything that's outside the normal. It's an undesired state that's significant. So if you have an undesired state that's significant, use your SMS tools and incident investigation form to go through and figure out why did it happen, how can we prevent it, and don't just keep it in your bubble. You're a small flight department, let's say. Larger flight departments do better with this, right? They have the tools, they have the people, they have the analytical horsepower. But the one airplane, 2 or 3 pilot operation typically does not. And so that's when you need to reach out to Wyvern. That's when you need to reach out to APS or your friends. It doesn't have to be any kind of commercial venture at all. And say, I want to team up with somebody to analyze this so it never happens again. And I want to share it. Can we get this out to the industry so other people can learn? And so there's a lot in your question. There's a lot in the answer there. Sorry if I kind of went around. I'm looking at the question again. But this crew was a professional crew by all rights in today's standard for the most part. They did something that wasn't smart. And it almost really bit them bad. And so I still also encourage you, everyone that's on this with us here today, to take seriously what you do for a living with your airplane. Know your airplane, know your aircraft, know what its limitations are. Do not get too close to those limitations. Give yourself some margin. Too many pilots out there flying red line on descent. That's crazy, but they do it because they can and nobody's stopping them. And too many pilots are flying really too low speeds at high altitudes. There's not enough margin there between your buffet boundary. And if you're not having these conversations, maybe you need to ask yourself when you look in the mirror, how professional of a pilot am I? How well do I know my aircraft? And how well do I know those limitations? And how much buffer do I have between losing control and being in control?
Love it. Great answer, Sonny. Thank you. I have nothing to add. Just I bow to that. Wonderful. All right. Let me bring up this one. So this is a great question, and I'm gonna hand it over to you because I think it's a really good one. Is that without UPRT, can a good SMS prevent such incidents? And I think the incident being referred to is the one you described in your presentation, Sonny. That kind of just a next level of discussion based on the one you just finished.
Yeah, I know the quick answer to that, but I really want to develop a better response so that it's better than just mine. So my quick answer, I'll go ahead and do it, is UPRT, when you think about what that really means, is the only solution to prevent systematically, not just an individual event, but systematically in the domain you work in. UPRT is that solution, and it doesn't have to be APS. Sorry, BJ. It just has to be any reasonable, well-designed UPRT so that your pilots know how to prevent that situation, how to be aware of potential situations. And we said this in the Air Force growing up, and I always pass it on to my students when I was an instructor. A superior pilot uses superior judgment, so they don't get themselves in a situation where they have to use their superior skill to get out of it, right? And so the UPRT, when it's designed properly, will increase your awareness and all these prevention strategies so you never have to use these skills. But it also provides you those skills should you need them. And these are not just anything. As much as experience I have as a military pilot, I would not dare go out to the local flight school or airport and open up a school and say, I'm gonna teach UPRT. It is really a scientific approach there's things that BJ and his team and I, we just, and my team love to talk about these, these physio-psychological factors that go into the event. When you're startled and you're in the event, you need to have that robust training that prepares you for that event. And your muscle memory needs to kick into action to get you out of that situation. So it's nothing to be taken lightly. And so the answer, without UPRT, can it be prevented? Can a good SMS? A good SMS has UPRT as a tool, just like a good SMS has an incident investigation checklist that's used systematically post-event. So they go hand in hand. You really can't have a good SMS without having that UPRT element in it, because LOC-I, that thing out there, that ominous thing out there, is killing so many people in our industry. It has, and the statistics show that. We need to do something about it.
Love it. Great, Sonny. You know, as you were talking, it reminded me of a presentation we did last year with Rich Stoll on the fatal nature of cross-controlled stalls. I'm just going to share one slide out of that. Let me bring you back in here so we can be in the conversation with this slide. I'm going to take the question down just so we can see the whole thing. So what this does, it kind of talks about what you were talking about there, Sonny. You know, those are those events on the left side: environmentally induced, system anomaly induced, and pilot induced. And what ends up happening, that little red ball you can see on the left, what it does is it propagates through the layers of defenses that the pilot has through training: aeronautical knowledge, planning, currency. You can see that next layer in aeronautical decision-making, risk assessment and management. The next one, startle surprise management, threat and error management, intervention recognition. And then once it passes that orange bar, you can see where it has airplane upset on it. And that's what Sonny's talking about a systematic process. Is irrespective of how it starts, where it comes from, is that it has to go through the funnel. It has to go through the window of the airplane upset. So, for example, you can have an SMS that's very effective at mitigating distraction. You can have another one that's very good at mitigating wake turbulence encounters, or automation mismanagement, or flight controls, or effective cross-check. The challenge is, unfortunately, is that the entire training system as it exists now is already doing a lot of work to try to mitigate those on a one-off approach. And so the UPRT overlay on that allows this propagation of this little risk, as you see it going through the process and through the upset, is that window of the upset will stop it. Now, you know, looking at this, it would think, well, how come the pilot's not noticing that little red ball that represents the unmitigated risk? The thing is, they have a lot going on. There's a lot of things happening, a lot of things occurring that they're mitigating, and those types of events can slip through to defenses despite the very best of intention and good habits of the crew. And unfortunately, statistics just reveals that it does happen. And I think the area of big concern, of course, is at the airplane upset. You want to have a layer of defense, that last line of defense, because at a certain point beyond that, when it gets to a true state of loss of control in flight, at that point, it doesn't matter how good the pilot is. Eventually, you run out of time and altitude to be able to make a difference. So, you know, that's kind of the layers of defenses. And I think the point would be the bow tie part of it, Sonny, you're talking about, is that area right in the middle, that airplane upset, that kind of orange block. And I think the great news that I'm trying to represent here is this is probably one of the primary differences between the classical way of approaching stall and unusual attitude training and the modern approach to upset prevention recovery training espoused by ICAO, is that the ICAO solutions addresses all of that spectrum. From left to right, how do we improve that? How do we increase awareness? How do we make a better pilot overall? So talking about how do we make the pilot more effective at being more aware and recognize and prevent an event, but should they encounter it, having the skills to be able to take effective action. So that's kind of, I thought, a very interesting way to maybe talk about that question about the different kinds of UPRT center.
Yeah, that was a great slide, BJ. And I just want to share with everybody that's tuned in here some news you can use, as one of my good friends says. You know, we talk about incident investigation checklists and methods for that. I mean, what BJ just had up on the screen there, it is really, when you look at it, it is like that bow tie. It's the James Reason Swiss cheese model. It's all that combined in a very beautiful graphic way. But it's also incident investigation. That's how you do incident investigation. You go to the right and say, this happened, and you start working your way backwards. Where did we have weaknesses here? How can we have prevented it? You just go through each of the layers of the James Reason Swiss cheese. But then as a technique, you can add human factors analysis on each of those layers too. That's called HFACs. So we have all these tools. And this is what we teach in our Wyvern Safety Leader training course. Everybody goes through the course, gets a little dose of HFACs with the James Reason Swiss cheese. But it all comes back to that, just what BJ was showing. Those little, we call them quality escapes in the quality world. It's a safety escape in the safety world. That little ball bounces through those layers, and we got to figure out how that happened and how we can ramp up those defensive layers. So awesome. A lot of commonality.
Yeah, absolutely, Sonny. Let me, I had another slide up, but I don't usually pull slides up during Q&A. That's kind of a new thing. Maybe that's something we can do more of.
Yeah.
Let me bring up this next one here. It's an interesting question. Could CRM for single pilot be a SA enhancer? I think that's a situational awareness enhancer. So I guess the question would be, as a single pilot, is there such thing as single pilot resource management? I believe is the question.
Yeah. Well, you could probably answer. No, not you. Probably you could answer this way better than me, BJ. But I go back to my military training when we flew solo in the highly maneuverable jets, and CRM was just really, what are your resources? You could have, if you don't have them, actually, you could have a potential wingman. If you want your airplane looked at, you could ask somebody, and business jet people or business aircraft people, like, I don't fly in formation. Well, you never know. You might have somebody join up on your wing if you ask. What would happen if you ask? And there are all kinds of military pilots out there flying and willing to join up on somebody in trouble. So I guess what I'm saying is CRM doesn't mean the person sitting next to you management. It's what all are the resources you have, and some other resources that single pilot operations might not be aware of is you can make a phone call on a radio, and they can do a phone patch to the manufacturer. If your airplane's distressed and you don't know what the problem is before you get on the ground, they can patch you through to the OEM manufacturer. You can talk to those engineers and say, here's my indications. I'm low on fuel. I got to make a decision. Do you have anything that can help me out before I put this thing on the ground? So these are just two scenarios that people will go like, well, maybe I thought of that before. Is that real? Can that really happen? Yes, that can really happen if you ask for it. So if you're a single pilot flying whatever kind of aircraft, you do have resources out there that air traffic control can patch you to get that other person on the radio with you to help you get on the ground safely. And so that's just one example, but there's all kinds of tools and resources you have as a single pilot on that flight deck that you haven't imagined yet. So let's have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenges of upset prevention recovery training is the vast majority of providers, even training centers, teach upset prevention recovery training single pilot, even though the crews are operating as a crew in their day-to-day flight operation. So that's one of the things that APS addresses in its training, is that when folks are coming through here through their program, we always recommend flight departments coming in pairs, because what we really need to do is take those skills they learn on aircraft, which primarily mitigates the psychophysiological components of the airplane upset, get them into the simulator and the class and type of airplane they operate, either through advanced simulation or virtual reality, and having them working together as a crew to be able to address UPRT. Now, and it's interesting how big of a time delay there is the first time a crew actually does an upset as a crew. So CRM doesn't technically change in an airplane upset. It's just time critical and more life-threatening, so the stress level is quite a bit higher. And what we find very often is that the crews don't necessarily have a call-out or a process to address a stall or an airplane upset. Back to the question, is that single pilot resource management is actually a protocol that single pilot should be pursuing. And to Sonny's point, part of those resources can include the technology on the airplane. It can include ATC. It can include the autopilot. It can include making better decisions where you wouldn't go into an airport as a single pilot, or you might consider doing it as a crew. You might not take off as a single pilot, whereas you would consider doing so as a crew, depending on what you're doing. So decision-making as a single pilot is different. It certainly is a situational awareness enhancer. And the one thing I'll leave it on is that in the MBAA Safety Committee, which I've been for a number of years, is we do analysis every year, and there's 6 times more fatal loss of control to single pilots than there is crewed operations. So the single pilot environment is definitely a higher risk when it comes to loss of control. And your flight risk assessment tool, your decision-making process, needs to be more stringent if you're operating single pilot, especially in consideration of what is your mission? Is it really necessary? Where are you going? Is the weather, the destination, the alternates really appropriate to your skill set? And also your ability to be able to be successful on that flight all the time. Not 9 times out of 10, not 99 times out of 100, but every single time. Sonny, anything to add to that before I move to the next one?
No, other than I see an opportunity for even more discussion in this domain. With the more and more pressure we have with the pilot shortage situation, the more jets that come on to scene that are capable of being piloted by one pilot, and the pressure to operate that way. And then for pilots, like most of the pilots that I'm familiar with have spent their whole career flying with another pilot on the flight deck. And now their management system, this gets back to strategic decision making. Now their management team is saying, you know what? The airplane can have one pilot, we're flying at one pilot. And they're forcing that decision. Well, that's their decision. But the question is, how are we preparing for that? Are we preparing that pilot fly by themselves on the flight deck? And what resources do they have to manage by themselves now? And how do they do that? It's a great conversation. We should do it more.
Absolutely. I think we need to have a LinkedIn Live event on that very topic. I
think so.
That's where a lot of our ideas come from for what we need to address. What is the industry telling us through questions? And they're great. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. Let me add one in here that's really interesting. And I actually do have a slide to add to that one. That's kind of fun. I'm liking that. Okay, let's have this question now here. It says, initial training can be said to be the foundation of any skill. Why not incorporate more emphasis on such training in ab initio portion on top of stall spin training? And, I think that, that first part of that statement is so powerful. Remember the laws of learning, right? In aviation is the law of primacy. What's learned first lasts longest. Law of intensity, the law of exercise. Remember that there's a lot of these things that are incredibly impactful to pilots that make a huge difference in who the pilot they are going to be after initial training throughout the rest of their lifetime and career. So, Sonny, over to you on that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Then I have a slide I want to share before we wrap up today.
My main comment is I couldn't agree more. When I spent, many years in the military, mostly in tactical type aircraft. So before I visited APS, I'm like, you can put me in any airplane, put me in any situation that any human could recover from, and I'll recover from it. I had that kind of cocky type confidence. And when I went to train with BJ and we went on flying together and he showed me the way they teach it, it was a little different than the way I learned it in the Air Force. And, but when I look at the science on it, I'm like, this makes sense. It's really a universal application. And I couldn't agree more with the comment there that this should be included in the foundational initial training for all pilots.
Yeah, and I think the exciting part is I'm going to promote one of our partners here, United Airlines and United Aviate Academy. And the exciting part is that they are really leading the industry on the next generation of pilots. And what United Aviate Academy is doing is integrating on aircraft and simulator upset prevention and recovery training for all of their students. And they're on a path to training 500 students a year with a lineup of some 10,000+ people in line for their program. And so the reason they're doing that is because they see loss of control in flight as the number one threat that it is, and understand that law of exercise, addressing it early, is not only going to prepare the pilots with the right kind of training, but the great news is that United Airlines also licensed with APS on its UPRT program. So what they learn at United Aviate Academy, their checklist, their procedures, their call out, their strategy maps directly into the exact UPRT strategies applied by United Airlines and all their Boeing and Airbus fleets of airplanes. So that's really exciting. Let me bring up just one slide here, Sonny, if you don't mind. It's going to be a slide that you're very familiar with. Let me just take a look here, see if I can get it. I'm putting myself on the spot here a little bit. Okay, right here. This is a slide from that I presented. I'm just going to take down that question while we chat about it here, just so we can see it a little bit better. This is a very familiar slide for you, of course. It's a assess your risk profile, a risk assessment matrix, and it's an example of one that you can use. But the interesting part is that when folks are looking at upset prevention and recovery training, it kind of applies back to that previous comment about can an SMS mitigate loss of control without UPRT? I think the real question is if you're the safety manager, a chief pilot, a director of flight operations, and your role is mitigating risk, and you look at the statistics, and nearly 50% of all fatal accidents in your industry is associated with loss of control in flight, how could you conclude otherwise that it's not at least possible? And for example, when you look here, you can see that possible is in the 3 as a minimum. Now, the problem or the reality of loss of control in flight is it's almost always fatal and catastrophic. So it lives along across the top of that area. So the challenge right now is that the industry, through its current approach to overcoming loss of control with academic and simulation training, is really treating loss of control as a low risk problem where it's a high risk issue. In fact, it's very high risk. And so the solutions or the mitigation have to fit the risk level. And so that's kind of the superpower of APS, is that we build programs based around the level of risk the operator wants to mitigate. If they consider it to be very high risk, then we have a fully comprehensive program for that. If it's moderate risk or it's low risk, then we have programs for that as well. The great part about that is that the operator chooses what level of risk mitigation they want to implement. Now, of course, we do our best to present this particular consideration about assessing their risk, and it's an important decision because it can have really severe implications if it's the wrong one. So this is kind of a way to look at it that's a little bit different, where you start on the desk of the safety officer and say, if you're mitigating your risk and your number one risk is loss of control in flight, and it's accountable for 50% of the fatalities, is your risk mitigation in proportion to the risk itself? And that's what it comes down to. So that's a familiar slide to you, Sonny. Anything you want to add on there before I take it down?
Yeah, well, we have a sophisticated colleagues in the industry that are really smart on SMS and safety risk management. And some of them I'm sure are going, well, that depends on that definition and that in this other definition. But what BJ's saying is right on. Whether your specific risk index card in your SMS defines possible or unlikely in a certain way, the point is, in relative terms, if you do nothing specific about UPRT, that likelihood does not change. If you do something about it that's meaningful, your awareness has been increased, your prevention techniques have been increased and enhanced. In relative terms, you may not be able to measure it. I've been asked when I was a safety officer in the Air Force, can you determine the exact likelihood of a bird hitting that part of the airplane and destroying the airplane? And we ran numbers for weeks and weeks and weeks. We came up with a number to make the general officer happy. And he looked at it and said, well, can you trust that number? And we said, no, we did the best we can, but these are just numbers. But what we can do is relativity and say, look, we do something about this risk, and we can argue all day long, rightfully so, that we have lowered the probability by taking this action, and that's what makes a difference. So regardless of your definition for likelihood, if you take active stance to prevent something and it's meaningful work, and when you survey your people, safety is quality with a safety focus. An SMS, I'll say it like that. An SMS is quality with a safety focus. You provide this training to your stakeholders, your customers, your internal customers, your teammates, and say, was this effective? Why do you think so? Why or why not? And you get that feedback. Now you have qualitative information to say that the work we're doing is lowering the likelihood. And that's all you're looking for. You might not be able to measure it, but at least you're doing something like that. And the other part there that people don't talk about, UPRT is one of those rare things that you can do something to lower the severity too. Because most of our safety work lowers likelihood. UPRT lowers likelihood and severity. If you get into the situation, you will reduce the risk because you know how to fly out of it, versus not knowing what to do, and it might be catastrophic. So it works on both sides of the equation. It's qualitative. You're not going to get exact numbers anywhere, but it makes sense to any professional that I would talk to that it's a reasonable thing to do.
it's always hard to measure the accident that never happens, right? And that's
Right.
the challenge that we all face. And I think the different approach that APS takes to this is the operator decides what their risk level is, and we provide a solution to mitigate the risk, whether it's low, medium, high, or very high risk. And the great news, to your point, Sonny, if they consider it very, very high risk, what we do is have a solution that will now bring that risk low, down to low risk, as long as they're staying current on their training. So to your point is, you can never absolutely measure it definitively, but the point is you're taking proactive action to reduce your risk level. And to your point, with effective training, you can also reduce the severity. So great discussion. So we're over time here now, Sonny. Any last final comments before we wrap it up here today? I think they've been great questions, great discussions. Always goes in directions that I don't expect, but today I thought it was really valuable.
Nothing other than let's just keep the conversation going. This is again what BJ and I and our teams, we get up every day wanting to have the conversation with you. And it's more just about learning together with you than it is about anything else. That we together can make a difference in really serious conversation about flying professionally and reducing those risks when we do so.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sonny, for your time, sir. Fantastic to see you as always. Appreciate your time. And a big thank you from both Sonny and I to everybody that's on the event here today. We know that most people watch the replay, but all of you that showed up here today live, great questions, really great conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Sonny, talk to you soon. Take care.
All right, BJ. Take care, bud.